Both types of clouds. And when I talk about clouds, I don't mean the ones that dot your beautiful Jamaican skies. I mean running computer programs and all your technologies over the internet. But both types of clouds actually share some commonality. They're hard to see through. You can't really get your arms around them. And they're usually the harbinger of change. Behind those come both opportunities and change. And I think that that's exactly where we're at right now when we talk about education technology. There's a change that has arrived, and we're actually this week, this minute, we're living through a really interesting time as it relates to technology, and particularly here in Jamaica. I want to share with you for the next 15 minutes or so the 4 ways that I'm watching the clouds, and that is the computer cloud type, revolutionizing the modern classroom and the modern education administrator. Now, let me be clear, I'm not an educator. I work in enterprise organizations. But it's very easy for me to see parallels between the classroom and the problems that we solve in shop floors. And it's very easy for me to see parallels between education administration and the kind of challenges that we solve in the boardroom. In the 1950s and 60s, if you were a student in Italy, this is what your classroom looked like. And for all intensive purposes, those students who succeeded in post-war Italy were those that had a copy of the textbook at home. There weren't enough textbooks to go around. Maybe you would be fortunate to sit near the blackboard, but at the end of the day, your education experience and your readiness for the job market after school was very much limited to could you get your hands on a textbook or could you sit near the classroom? And that's exactly what reality was for those students just 50 years ago. 30 years ago, this is actually one of my classrooms. I went to school in Canada. We had plenty of textbooks. We didn't have a problem getting our hands on textbooks to read at night. But our problem in Canada in the 1970s and 80s was the school system was set up to really just teach us what the textbooks were written on. So I could only learn what my teacher knew or what we happened to have a textbook in the classroom on. The other challenge we had was a philosophy of educating students to basically be interchangeable factory floor workers. We were all being taught the same thing with the same level of standards, expectation. And that was the norm in the 1970s and 80s in Canada. The question in front of all of us in this room, and most importantly yourselves and my colleagues here up with me this morning, is what do we want from the modern Jamaican education system? Shouldn't we be designing classrooms where we're not constrained by the number of textbooks we have or the subject matter of those textbooks? Surely there is an opportunity for us to leverage technology to reinvent the way we think about modern education here in Jamaica. Now, this isn't to say that there isn't certain threshold knowledges. Of course, we expect every student to graduate school with a certain functional knowledge of maths and sciences and history and civics. But beyond those basics, beyond what we expect every student to know, regardless of whether they're going to become chefs or clergy or database administrators, don't we have an obligation as educators to do more than train interchangeable students coming out of the schools? Don't we have an obligation to recognize that every student's educational journey is probably unique to that student? Not to say that every student has to have the same level of skills in everything, but we can easily imagine a world where the students who want to be database engineers, or students who want to be clergy, or students who want to be politicians, their educational experience is going to be unique to their passion and their interests. And I can relate, because 35 years ago when I was in school, I knew very early I wanted to spend my career working with computers. The problem was there were no textbooks on computers in the late 70s and early 80s in public school. And my teachers didn't know anything about the Apple II that was sitting in the corner of the classroom. So my educational opportunities were limited, despite the fact that North Bridlewood was an outstanding school, because the expectation of the classroom was to teach me things that the textbooks and the teachers had prepared for every student, not what was unique to my learning experience. So again, what about your students that want to be biologists or a dancer or a database engineer? Again, we expect them to know fractions, we expect them all to know decimals, we expect them to all know a little bit about Jamaican history, of course. But that last 5%, not only does it allow us to tailor the education that's unique to the student's passion and the student's interests, but it allows us to ignite inside them something that gets them excited about going to school. If that last 5%, if that last 30 minutes a week gives me as a student an opportunity to learn something about my greatest passion, I'm going to be excited about going to school. Now, it's wildly impractical, of course, to think that every public and private school teacher in Jamaica is going to become as expert in database engineering and fine art, dance performance, and religious studies to support the interests of every one of those students, never mind finding time to tutor them. But the truth of the matter is, we don't need that expectation. I submit to you that the most important investment you can make in your schools is a good internet connection. And yesterday I shared the stage with some people from Flow who were talking about the investments they're making to bring broadband into the school. Through that internet connectivity, by lighting up internet technology in the classroom, we're able to empower students' boundless learning. We're able to allow our teachers to focus on the 90% or the 95% that we expect every student to know, fractions, decimals, who Norman Manley was, all these important things that we expect everyone, regardless of where they're going to go once they finish school, to understand. But the content that's available through institutions like the Khan Academy allows us to bring to the classroom tremendous content that we could never have enough textbooks to cover, that we would never have enough knowledge in every one of our teachers to cover. The other thing that's interesting to me is because these online tools have got some great assessment capabilities built into them, it means that everyone, whether you are a teacher or an administrator, or perhaps most importantly, a parent, everyone has the ability to understand how those students are progressing on those subjects, something that I know in this profession we've always struggled with. Not are we testing what we're teaching, but are we testing comprehension of the students? I know when I was a kid, I'd come home from school every night, and my father would sit down at dinner and he'd say, "So what'd you learn at school today?" And I'd say, "Nothing." And probably a conversation that many of you have had with your fathers at some point in time too, which is ridiculous. Of course I learned a lot at school, but I couldn't remember. I didn't want to talk about it. Because the content in the cloud, because what I'm learning can be tracked, because my parents can see how I'm spending my time, because my teachers and the administrators can see how I'm spending my time, it means the parents can engage more and bring the education experience home as well. If my father knows that I want to be a chemist and he sees on his smartphone on the train home that I spent 25 minutes today studying the periodic table, he can start the conversation by, "Tell me something about tin," or "Tell me something about carbon. I noticed you were studying that today." And that brings the parents more into the student education experience. Now, the vast majority of these resources are available for free. I love the Khan Academy, for example, and many, many organizations that are producing tremendous primary and secondary school content. It means that we can bring this into the classroom at no expense to many of the schools and the administrators. The other challenge that I have for you as educators is to figure out how you can contribute back to this community. It's very possible, for example, that the greatest teacher in English poetry lives in Canada. Jamaica's got some great teachers, but you don't have every great teacher. Other countries have great teachers too. So how can we bring that great mid-century English poetry teacher's content from Canada to Kingston? Well, the internet allows us to do that. If the best grade 4 fraction teacher is in New Zealand, how can his content get into your classroom? Again, the answer is through the content available over the web at no charge. Every teacher in Jamaica will be delighted to bring their best peers from around the world into their classroom for their specialty. And that's exactly what we can do when we embrace the cloud in the classroom. Now, with this comes, of course, the responsibility to figure out how you can give back. If the best mid-century English poetry teacher lives in Kingston, Ontario, Canada, what can you contribute back? What do you, as educators, know that you can contribute back? So I encourage you to think about the content that you build and figure out how to contribute it back to the larger conversation that's happening around the rest of the world on this same topic. Now, in 1950s and 60s Italy, as I said, the biggest challenge was there weren't enough textbooks to go around. I'm also going to ask if maybe our expectations of textbooks really needs to be reevaluated. Think about how much more engaging it is for the students when you can use multimedia, when you can have video, when you can have audio, when you can have animation and quizzes, things that the textbook just is not the right tool for. Reading about Norman Manley is something that obviously we expect every Jamaican student to do. And I don't want to take away from the textbook content around his great accomplishments. But wouldn't it be even more engaging if we could see that day in 1962 where the Union Jack came down and the Jamaican flag went up, if that video was made available as part of the content we teach about Norman Manley? I think that every student would be much more engaged. I also think that if your textbooks are anything like the textbooks that we have in San Diego, California, they were probably written 10, 11 years ago in a lot of cases. And it's hard to teach geography when your textbook was written before Kosovo was a country, or before South Sudan was a country, or Montenegro and Serbia. The truth of the matter is, in the States, our Secretary of Education, Arne Duncan, says one of our biggest challenges is simply the age of our textbooks and keeping them up to date. Our other challenge in the States, we're not spending our education money on the right things. We spend a lot of money on our schools, but the truth of the matter is, things that are expensive in the administrative and the operational side are robbing the classrooms of value. So I want to talk about what we can be doing to bring more money into the classroom and less money into administrative and operating things. One of the things we do in the States to respond to budget cuts, we cancel programs. We say things that are elective or things that are expensive will no longer be done. So that means we cancel programs like school sports. And when we do that, it becomes very evident that there's unintended consequences. This is a great article from the Washington Post on how the importance of athletic and phys ed programs and sports as part of the larger holistic education program. Things happen like now that 2/3 of schools in the United States don't have phys ed programs. I live in a country where 1 in 3 children is obese. I live in a country where students don't have music programs, and there's now inconclusive evidence that taking away music program has a result on students' math performance. And cognitive learning studies show us that active kids, kids that have phys ed, they learn better. Every subject, they learn better. But because we don't have enough money for our infrastructure and for our administrative and our operations, we cut key curriculum. And that's a shame. So this is an instance where I know my experience in the enterprise can lend a hand in educational context. We spent a lot of time in enterprise over the years helping our clients understand how modern technology can save them money. We moved to the cloud. We shut down systems inside businesses, and we moved them to the cloud. And as a result of that, businesses save money because they're not buying expensive hardware for every one of their facilities, every plant and every warehouse. They're not buying expensive software. They're not paying expensive support contracts. They don't have expensive IT staff in every location. They're not committing capital up front. They're able to move to a subscription model that grows and shrinks as their organizational needs do. They don't have to buy expensive disaster recovery systems for every location. They're able to push administrative burden and administrative expenses onto companies like RenWeb and Epicor because we run the cloud systems for them. And that same efficiency that we bring to commercial organizations is the same efficiency that we should be bringing to the classroom. What if we could cut 40% of the IT expense for Jamaican administrative and operational environments. What does that mean to every school? Does that mean one more teacher? Does that mean a new computer lab? Does that mean 3 more field trips? If you're able to reduce your administrative and your operating expenses, how can you make sure that that money flows into the classroom? The other thing that happens when we move into the cloud is it makes it very easy for us to have consistency and analyze performance. When I talk to a CFO, Chief Financial Officer, out in a corporate world, and she says, you know, every one of my facilities around the world has a different accounting system and a different fiscal calendar and a different chart of accounts, and they all use different inventory numbers. Can you help? We say to her, absolutely. We can move you into a single system. It'll save you money, but most importantly, it will allow you to look at performance consistency. Think about what that would mean. It would mean a world where every administrator is able to say, look, this school has so much money flowing into the classroom, and this school only has a fraction of that. Let's figure out the best practices. Let's learn which vendors are performing and giving us better deals on our services. Let's learn more about benchmarking our schools against one another, not to critique the administrators or the principals, but to understand where we can drive inefficiency out, because chances are every campus does something better than every other campus. And when you move onto a standardized system, you're able to see that very, very easily, whether it's in the commercial world or in the academic world. With the cloud, regional administrators are able to very easily compare accurately and understand how that cost efficiency flows to the bottom line. I want to close by touching on 2 important concepts. The first is security, and the second is IT leadership. There is sometimes a mindset that moving things to the cloud creates a security issue. And you know, a great example of why I think that fallacy has been disproven is the cloud doesn't burn down. Tragic to hear about a school losing its records. But it doesn't have to be fire. It could be a natural disaster. It could be a cyber threat. It could be the fact that you are the world's greatest educators, but you are probably not the world's greatest computer security professionals. You don't have the time or necessarily the talent inside every campus to protect and to manage all your infrastructure. When you move to the cloud, you're able to reassign that responsibility to cloud vendors like RenWeb and Epicor and others. The other point that we talked a little bit about yesterday up here on stage is the importance of IT leadership. And those of you who are administrators here today have a very real responsibility. You need to set the pace. You need to set the standard. You need to make sure that there's consistency applied across all of your schools. Because if you don't, what happens is every school and every campus and every classroom adopts its own standards. When you're able to lead as administrators, almost CEOs of your respective schools, if you will, and you're able to say, these are the systems, and these are the policies, and these are the practices that we're going to use consistently, you can drive significant efficiencies and significant gains. So I'm going to leave you with the same 4 thoughts that I started with. Moving your administrative and your classroom operations to the cloud allows you to reshape the student experience by bringing these interactive cloud-based multimedia environments everywhere, not just into the classroom, but into the home as well, and engage the parents. Moving to the cloud is going to significantly streamline delivering your academic administrative services. It's going to save you time and operational expense. And I believe, based on what we've seen, it's also going to significantly improve security and reliability. I think Jamaica's got an enormous opportunity ahead of her to figure out how you want to reimagine the education experience. And I think it's a question not of if, but simply how and when. And we're excited to be part of that. So thank you so much for being with us today.